Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory.
We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. If you desire to integrate this learning practically and supportively into your life, then Soul-Driven Motherhood is your space to go deeper. Head on over to nourishingthemother.com.au or follow any of the links on our socials for Soul-Driven Motherhood.
We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we're so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner, and today's podcast heralds the very beginning of our month of body love with Soul-Driven Motherhood and on the podcast. So today's podcast is the stories our bodies could tell. And what we really want to talk about is how we desire to love more of our bodies as a result of the voids that we have, and the path that Bridget and I have been on, charting more and more, in the words of Bridget, of how to love our bodies with a greater depth, perhaps even wisdom. So before we jump into that conversation, I'd love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au, scroll on down to the red banner, fill in your email address, and once every so often we send you off an email that has all the links so that you can pick and choose where you'd love to dive deeper. So drop your email at nourishingthemother.com.au. So Bridget.
Yes. I love that we're setting up this month of beautiful interviews and deep dives with some wonderful people to I guess give our listeners, insight and perhaps opportunity to reflect on their own stories as we share ours, because you don't decide to do a month on body love without experiencing periods in your life of great body resentment, right? And we love to excavate some of those voids, don't we, of kind of what leads us to where we are. And I'm sure, as we'll find in this conversation, that, you and I both have those, and they're probably going to look pretty different. And I think it's really important to understand the stories that we hold and how they shape what we value, how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and how we relate to others, so that we can bring a little more consciousness to that, and therefore power in reclaiming or unlearning some of the beliefs that we've perhaps taken on that maybe aren't our own. Yeah.
When you came up with this title, The Stories That Our Bodies Could Tell, I mean, that is even just such the most wonderful title. I think it sounds like the beginning of a wonderful story, doesn't it? The stories my body could tell would be. I think that would make an amazing documentary.
Yeah, wouldn't it? Yeah. And I mean, for me, I think, as you're talking, I'm having all of these little kind of like things connecting for me. And I think motherhood has been like so much of a full circle for me of appreciating my body, perhaps in ways that I never really could before. One of my memories is I must have been about 12 or something, and I can remember this little action where you'd put your elbows and your hands wrists together, and you do this little action, and it was like, I must increase my bust. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah, not for 20 years.
Yeah. So that was I legitimately thought I could do that and maybe grow boobs one day. Because my voice, for me, in this boyish, excruciatingly skinny body that was straight up and down, without a curve to be spoken of, I desperately wanted to feel like a woman, you know, or to feel like, you know, I was feminine in that way. And I had this enormous gratitude, like when I was, I think it might have been breastfeeding my second maybe. And I realized that these breasts that I'd had like no regard for were so incredibly, you know, profound in how they provided so amply for my children, when, you know, all I wanted was ample breasts, and I had them, but they were kind of what's the word, they, you know, they were quiet achievers, you know, in this sense of how they fed my children, and I had this real appreciation for them that I had never had before, and that motherhood provided me access to. And similarly, being pregnant for me, with all of my babies, has been a deeply embodied feminine experience that I have loved for all of the ways that it provided me with deeper access to pleasure and curves and reference what my body can create and do and be. And so I love motherhood for being a portal to kind of, is it make amends, or just to circle back to that teenage or child self who yearned to then go, like, see, look what your body can do, you know, that you didn't even know was possible. And look at how you can feel in it that you didn't know was possible. And I love that. And I remind myself of that as I look at my stomach, because it's probably my most vulnerable place now, because I have an umbilical hernia and a belly button that almost has its own postcode, you know. And I remind myself of the stories it tells. And then I question, well, do I want to change it? You know? Yeah.
So really, it's part of a really big conversation.
Yeah. It is.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is. Where do you sit on both sides of those arguments?
Well, I mean, I've been kind of lately, because I've been training physically, it's become more of a problem, like physically, because there's things I can't do. So, and that was always my my kind of line. Like when I saw a surgeon in between Sylvie and Pearl to make sure that there wasn't any kind of risk with it, like health risk, and the surgeon said, oh no, like it's fine, like you just have another baby if you want to, and we can just fix it later. And I said, oh yeah, but like is it cosmetic reasons why we'd fix it, or is it like in terms of my health and the risk of my bowel, you know, kind of becoming, you know, enmeshed in my belly button kind of thing. He's like, oh no, it's largely just because of cosmetic. And I said, oh look, I'm not so worried about that. And he's like, oh gosh, if everybody was like you, I'd be out of a job. You know, and he made that comment, and I was like, wow, like, because at that point for me, it really, the cosmetic nature of it was secondary to how I felt it was impacting my life, or could impact my life. But, you know, I really have to often be with the part of me that still doesn't like looking at it or doesn't enjoy it, and ask myself if, you know, if I could change it, would I? And how would I then feel if it didn't tell me the story that it tells me now, which is that it's grown 3 babies. Do I want the stomach that looks like it hasn't grown 3 babies? I don't know if I do, because I can appreciate how motherhood has changed my body. I don't want to go back to who was in that body before it changed. because she wasn't embodied like this, you know.
Yes, my friend, I know.
That's brought up all these feelings I didn't kind of realize were there.
That's really beautiful.
Which is why I love these conversations, right?
Yeah, such a beautiful invitation into not only feeling into you and your story, but for the piece of each of us that your story highlights that we get to touch into.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of you opening like this beautiful portal through vulnerability. Like that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think about motherhood as a pathway to pleasure as well, I mean, I didn't know the pleasure that was possible in my body before I became a mother, because I hadn't explored that part of me yet. Really, it was really only surface level, probably more performative than anything else.
What do you think in motherhood made you explore that differently?
Oh, well, actually, it was the void. It was the challenge of my own fertility. That meant that in order to become a mother again and again, that practice was crucial. So, you know, having PCOS and having secondary infertility, and they were just more points of expansion, which I see now in hindsight, right? Weren't particularly comfortable at the time. Wasn't particularly nice when I wasn't particularly, you know, like when I was 25 and someone said, oh, you know, you're not going to be able to have children like without being on, you know, a number of drugs, and, you know, like you're going to have all of these problems and you might miscarry, and like, you know, this whole list of things that I'd never heard might be a problem for me. That was really hard to reconcile in my mind then. But it also, you know, woke up in me a determination to find my own way. That meant that I explored my sexuality in ways that I never had before. So that's a pretty beautiful gift.
What other stories would your body tell?
I don't know right now. I'm still feeling into all of what that just came up in this little conversation.
Let me ask you another question. What are the cultural or family narratives that you can see you were immersed in and grew up in, and perhaps even into, about woman and her body?
Well, I mean, my mother had chronic fatigue syndrome when I was quite little, and, you know, I think ignored her body a lot of the time. Because when you come from a family of, you know, where stoicism reigns, and it's all about the doing and the getting, you know, and the service and all of that, then I don't think there was, you know, a great deal of focus on feeling and listening. A little, but not in any kind of big way. And that I think every stage that I would go through, you know, through puberty, like my mum would do her absolute best to really honor me in that. But it was also, I think, a stretch, because it wasn't her narrative to honor that. And it's a clashing of worlds then. Clashing of your imprint and your desire, and that can be really, really clunky. And so then there's a hangover for the child of that, right?
I just think that's the perfection of just,
I love it.
we all do, right? we all advance the consciousness based on where our parents got to.
Yeah.
And then we go further and we find the paradox between the two worlds, the one
Yes.
that we will realize or see, and the one that we've come from that we're here to heal and change.
Yeah.
Like we all need that. And then we decide how far we can take that, and then our children pick up from there.
Pick up the rest. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating to no end, really, isn't it? Because I think we like that imprint or that narrative that we hold is so viscerally real that it's only when you come up against the narratives that others hold and feel are real that you realize we're all just a walking collection of stories. And with that, awareness is a beautiful opportunity then, because it's like, what do I want to continue to run and forge deeper, more entrenched narratives? And what do I want to, change the track on? Where do I want to kind of take that like train line and kind of move the whatever you call it so that it diverts to a different track? And it takes work, right? Like it takes practiced work to often do that because we're going against what feels like our nature.
Totally. What do you think about women and their bodies, just as a whole?
Oh, I think I just see so much disconnection, like distancing from, shoving down, not listening. And we know whether that's the emotions that come up in our bodies, and your mothers and their relationship to anger is a classic case. And how much can we feel what our bodies bring up for us? How much can we sink into the juiciness or the blood or the muck or, the excretions of our bodies without recoiling or wanting to sanitize in some way? And I think we notice that when we come up against our daughters and any kind of edges there, because it'll show us what we're working with, or the conversations that we find ourselves having around periods or anything like that. But I also see like this undercurrent of desire to access something deeper, but not quite knowing how to get there as well. Like knowing that you don't quite enjoy feeling like this, and you have this echo or this sense that it's possible to feel something different, but you don't know the path to get there because it's never been one that you've had. And I think we can get stuck there and lament that, or we can get curious about what it would be like to walk that. And that's what I really hope that this month is an invitation toward. Or a practice for those who are already practiced, because I don't think we can have enough practice because we live in a world that is largely dissociated from the body.
100%. And there is no point of arrival.
No. Because you're gonna have moments where you're deeply embodied, and then moments when you kind of like forget you even have one. And you're going to expand and contract.
Right. It's waves that roll with the highs and the lows. Because relationship, human part of you. And at the same time, you realize when you get to the next thing, or you bust the next thing that's hard, or you reach the next thing you're working towards, integrating, believing, being, or living, you realize there's a whole other ocean. Like, there's never a point
where you're ever at that point, like the enlightenment.
Endless oceans.
I love that.
An endless relationship full of its seasons and cycles.
kind of like the explorers, you know, the people who used to explore the world by boat, and they'd land somewhere and think that, like, this is it, this must be, I must have reached the final frontier. And then you realize 20, 30, 50, 80 years later, oh, no, that was just one tiny little bit. And it's kind of like us, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Do you have friends who you see detest the skin they're in?
I wouldn't say close friends who I see detest. No. But I see disconnection.
What does that look like?
Kind of a handing over of power externally, whether that be, you know, to practitioners and like, I think, you know, all of us can experience periods of this too. But I would say, and, you know, I really see myself in them too, like those periods where you're like, want an answer outside of you, or you don't actually want to be with your body right now because you have things you'd rather be with instead. So we'll pathologize this or make that some other kind of problem that I'll deal with later than be with it now. And I think that's probably a societal, you know, Western view as well. But in terms of women that I would see detest their bodies, I can think of like some family who I see detest their bodies, particularly through pregnancy and through not honouring the journey that their body has been through and going gently on that, but instead wishing and willing and punishing it into, you know, like submission or judging it and resenting it and perceiving that everybody else judges and resents it. I've certainly seen that. And I find that pretty heartbreaking.
What would you love for them to know?
I would love them to just know how marvelous their body is as it is, without it needing to be anything other than it is right now. And that if we were to grasp just how perfect the role it is playing right now is for the growing baby, for the woman, then potentially some of the symptoms I think that we experience too, or some of the mental emotional symptoms that are experienced by women, perhaps will be alleviated in some way, because there wouldn't be this, you know, internal just battle between what the body wants and needs during the time of pregnancy and what the woman has internalized, often by her culture or by her family, of who she thinks her body needs to be. And I would really love for her to be able to have that reverence, or build that reverence inside herself that says, no, this is important right now. This life phase that I'm in right now is important, and I can love my body for how she's changing, just as I can love her when I think she's perfect or she's how I think she needs to be. How much can I love the shifting and the changing and what's possible for me when I descend into that instead of resist it or wish it away. Yeah.
What would you want your daughter, could be your son too, of course there's huge rising incidence of boys with So any of your children, I shall rephrase that, what would you want them to know when they are in times of suffering with their own body image?
I would love them to have a practice of remembering the small things of the legs that move them to where they want to go and how they can run and jump, or the arms that have hugged the people that they love, or the eyes that have seen the most beautiful things that they could ever dream of seeing, or, you know, the hair that's told the stories of the fashions or the things that have been important to them over their life, and that they've been able to characterize as, you know, as their own expression. I would love them to have a practice of challenging their own distortions, because I think so much of our body image challenges come from focusing on like the one thing that we might hate or that we might perceive others judge, and that takes up so much space in the mind that all of the other perfections of that body are unseen or go unseen. And so I think a practice of taking time, I guess a little like what a body scan would do, like a body scan meditation that, you know, that talks to each part of your body and how, you know, it cares for you, and that a practice like that is a beautiful way of remembering your body beyond the internalized shame that can take root, that says it needs to be anything other than it is. Something like that.
That'd be nice if you learned that in school.
Pardon?
But wouldn't that be nice if you learned?
Yeah. What stories does your body tell? Could she tell?
Oh my Lord, so many stories. So many stories. If we're thinking about it from, oh God, so many. It's just I have trouble being able to categorize them. But if we're thinking about them in terms of the context for this body love, then my body could definitely tell the stories of flagellation and punishment and suffering, both inflicted from others and from myself. It could certainly tell a narrative of how I've loved you when you hated me. And it's part of why I actually really love returning to the work of Dr. Pincola Estes when she talks about the body as the consort, the eternal consort. I always return to
explain that.
Pardon?
Can you explain that?
Yeah. I always return to that because she talks of the body like your soulmate, your perfect eros, your divine lover, that regardless of how much hate you have or how much abuse you inflict or where you take it and whether you acknowledge it or don't, like a faithful, love-struck, I don't know, puppy, this eternal consort still shows up to love you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because isn't the body always trying to love you?
It always loves you. Regardless of what you do, there it is. Regardless of where you go, there it is. Regardless of how you abuse or neglect or ignore, there it is. It's the eternal love, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's the very reason that you have the capacity to be alive. It is what carries you through this world. It is literally the home of your soul. It's not just a flesh suit, which I hear sprouted so many times. So I really love the idea of the eternal consort, and I reflect upon it often, because if I could really sit into what it is as a mother to love your child through their ugliest parts of them, and still to show up with unconditional love, unconditional, through the battering, through the bruising, through the stretching of your heart, through the breaking of any fantasies that you have or ideals that you hold up, still, in the battling of the rain and the winds and, all of it, still you show up to love that child. And that's what the body does for me.
Yeah.
So the sense of heartbreak when I really reflect on all of the times that I have raged against this eternal consort, this love that has always remained consistent and that always stays here like a hammock, just in case I should wish to return. And I honour that, because I know how hard that is. So that is part of where I do really sit in the spiritual community of my body is my temple. This is the home of the divine. This is the divine. And when I hurt this flesh, I'm hurting the divine. Mm. So I really, really sit in that camp now.
Yeah.
In a way that I could easily have admonished in certainly my younger iterations. And I think my body is a temple is almost the catch cry for, gets bantered around in ways that are somewhat offensive these days. So I always reflect upon that. There's some part of our human psyche that knows that, because I think when things appear in pop culture, I'm always fascinated by them. That's a conversation for another day. But my body as a temple is very much part of mainstay culture now.
It is.
Yeah. But we don't, on a conscious level, understand what that means, but there's some seed within us that does. Mm. And so it appears in the collective conscience, right, which is pop culture. And
it's so subjective what it looks like to treat it like a temple, right?
Right. I don't really know what that means, but, it's certainly something that I return to often. So the stories my body could tell would be the ones of the scars and the battered bruises, of self and other. And each of those would tell their own story, and it would tell of the experiences of having a body that allows me, like you had said, the deepest sense of pleasure and the greatest opportunity to open, to meet another on this plane or another, depending on, how we want to get. This body lets me do that. This body lets me have. Yeah. And of all of the lovers and the men and the women that have touched this body and the children and the stroking and the igniting of sensation. I mean, it's the stories that alone could tell is extraordinary. And then it would tell of carrying a child and just like you were birthing one.
Oh, and of feeling a child inside you, like feeling the movement of another life inside you.
Yeah, it's still bizarre at the same time as I'm completely awestruck by it. It's completely bizarre as well. Yeah. And I think that body memory of those, flutters and kicks in your body, I don't know if that ever leaves you. Like I have a somatic memory of what that feels.
I hope it never does. It's the most awe-inspiring feeling. Yeah. And that feeling of the head moving onto your cervix, like in the weeks leading up to birth, and the way that it touches into parts of your cellular body memory that you've never met before, and then what that opens. Like that just fascinates me.
Yeah, totally. So I have a complex relationship with my body. And I think for the rest of my life, because that void is so big, that I will always be cycling through a really conscious journey, or as conscious as I can be, into entering the territory that is unconscious about my body, and how I choose to separate or identify with it, I think is a really fascinating journey. I think it's more complicated for women who are trained out of their bodies and into their minds, and whose emergence of sexuality is so perverted that it becomes unsafe to even exist in this body. And that taking of something that is so innately sacred, particularly to women, and the stripping away of that ability to give, to experience, to share love with another. I mean, I think that is a deep, 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 deep tragedy. Deep tragedy.
Yeah.
So I feel into those stories when I think about the body of woman. So I have a cold sore at the moment. I can feel it bleeding, which is funny right now, right? So I have other layers, of course, of context of eating disorders and performance of the body versus embodiment, being afraid to be seen, to be witnessed and to be looked at, of not the fear of being out of control of what my human body would do that my mind or psyche were not ready for. I think there's so much in the preparation of the transforming of a woman's body that we still don't do very well.
Yeah.
Yep. I can feel those stories. I feel the punishment of flesh. You know, I have this double-edged sword of a yogic father who was altruistic in all of the ways and outlooks on life, and who hated my fat, like hated it, which I find so interesting. So, I mean, there's so much that's contextualized about that in terms of the feminine body as she's expressed in her largeness and in her roundness and in her outward expression of sexuality. And
what that represented for him, either on a conscious or unconscious level.
Totally. Yeah, the feminine in general, right? And I think there's a lot of suffering that goes on for young girls as they transform through womanhood and sexuality. It's a very outward experience versus boys where it's a very inward one. Not seen.
Yeah.
Judged and watched and looked at and critiqued by people outside of them. And then the added layer of that emergence is instantly entwined with sexuality, and therefore potentially the perversion or the shutting down of that. I mean, I think it's a very complex field.
So complex.
Yeah, so complex, yeah. So I feel the stories of your gluttonous, if you have flesh, and I feel the stories of my mother that were your self-worth is based on your dress size.
Yeah, right.
So the skinnier you are, clearly, the better person you are. And the larger you are, clearly, the more of a no-hooper you are.
And that was a really clear imprint for you.
Oh, my God, so clear. My mum had me in a weight loss, like fat-pinching gym when I was like 13.
Wow.
I had to stand on those scales, you know, that have like you push the little bars, like you stand on them so they can measure by like like they didn't have digital ones back then. And I would sit there in the middle of this gym with women all around me and it would be, and why do you think you've put on 500 grams this week?
Oh my God.
And now I look back and I'm like, I don't fucking know, mate. Like maybe because I grew boobs. Like, I don't know.
Maybe because I had a drink of water.
I don't know. Like, back then that was it. But, you know, I was extremely tall and had many, many judgments on my body, which still comes, I came up with a conversation the other night, is no one, now here's where I stand on bodies. No one has a right to comment on anyone else's body. You don't have a right to comment on anybody's body. Full stop. That person's body has nothing to do with you. You do not have a right to say anything about another human's body. Full stop. Anytime you say something, it's your shit. It's projection.
And is that been something that, you know, you have been really big on setting a boundary around?
Yeah, with my kids. Yeah. So that person's like, cool. Just like we're having huge conversations at the moment around diversity and inclusion. That includes body types. You don't get to comment on another person's body. But I can tell you, as a 6'1" woman, there is not a place or a shop that I will walk into that someone doesn't feel they have the right to say, wow, you're so tall, you're like a giant. Great. And you're fat and have cellulite. How would that feel when you heard that 10 times a day?
Yeah.
You know what? Your face is pretty ugly. Your nose is pretty big. How about everyone tells you that? You know what? You've got no boobs. How about we just tell you that 10 times a day?
Any kind of judgment on anybody's body.
On anybody's body. Full stop. Has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
So that's a really hard line not hard line, but a very conscious conversation I have with my children, because we do not have a right to comment on anybody else's physical body ever. That's not it. If you've got feelings about that, then let's talk about your feelings.
In response to that.
Yeah. But you don't have a right just to blurt out randomly, oh my God, you have so many pimples on your face today.
Yeah. Because you know as a teenager how that felt, right?
Well, whatever it is.
Right? Whatever it is. But this is the whole thing, like, pick the thing that is your wound and then imagine that being said to you, you know, every day.
Yeah, right.
You realize how inappropriate it is.
So inappropriate. I remember actually, God, would it have been Gwen or Lola? I can't even remember which way, because I've coached basketball since, you know, my eldest two were like 5. One of my babies, whether it was my 3rd or my 4th, I was coaching. I always used to just pop them on the sling on my back and I'd still be coaching, like, you know, 3 weeks after having a baby or something. And I remember this one time, would have been with Jade's, the girls I was coaching with Jade's. It must have been Lola. Anyway, I still had the like baby bump and belly bump and squishy belly thing.
Yeah.
And one of the girls on the team, her mum had just had a baby at the same time as me. And she turned around to me at some point in the training and went, wow, you still look like you're pregnant. And I had this moment where I was like, she's 11, Julie, she's 11. She's 11. She's 11 years old.
Yeah.
How you respond here? And then she followed it up with, oh, my mum doesn't at all. She doesn't look like she's ever had a baby.
Oh, God.
At that point, I burst out laughing. And I was like, it's great. Run. But it really came to me that that's an 11-year-old girl who's so tuned in to bodies that it makes me question what the conversations are that are happening at home. And today I sat at a table with a group of mums having a coffee, and one of them was lamenting a conversation that a very honest, very true friend of hers had, just letting her know that her son's like seriously obese and she's really worried about all of the things, and that, you know, she needs to do something because that's what a good mother would do.
Yeah, right.
And he's not seriously obese, and they're aware of it, and they're doing family gym time and having conversations around food, right? And the thing is, there are different bodies. There is not one body.
Yeah.
So,
and at what point does your need to help, or does you know, sense that you have some kind of wisdom to offer override that person's what's the word, kind of need to be respected? That means that you just keep your mouth shut, you know, like that you just honor their experience as however they're experiencing it, knowing that you don't know anything, really.
Exactly. This is the point, right? You know nothing about how this person's body is perfect for them in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And the lesson and the things they're here to do.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with one type of body.
And whatever the current culture's preference is for the popular body, right? Because that's just socially constructed. Because you can just look over history and see how that's changed over millennia.
Exactly. Exactly. So even, you know, I mean, I've certainly had many conversations with myself and my husband and other professionals and you, Bridgie, as my daughters have grown up, and I found myself facing, fuck, this wound is so big. What comes out is my need to want to make them wrong or make their bodies wrong, because that is my unconscious programming. And I am practiced enough to go, fuck, it hasn't left my mouth, but I see you in there inside my head.
Yeah.
What am I going to do with you? Because that was how I was treated. That's my story. That doesn't need to be their story.
But I mean, but you would see this in older generations, particularly. Like, my in-laws are fucking terrible with this kind of thing. Like, the first thing my stepfather-in-law will make a comment on is like my body, how I look whenever he sees me. Because his story or his partner's story around their bodies and how big or small their bodies are is a subject of a regular conversation. So therefore it must be subject for a regular conversation with everybody else. But it is so inappropriate.
Yeah, we just don't have a right to comment on someone else's body. And how about we just work on inclusion for all and trusting that person's body is perfect for them, for whatever it is that they could do, learn and grow through. What if beautiful? And I can tell you, as a child who was chubby and had a whole lot of puppy fat that apparently needed to be stripped down by going to a gym, which it didn't, by the time I was 15, had eating disorders out, you know, you name it, I had it. That lasted a really long time for work my way through. And once my body actually went through puberty, turns out all that puppy fat that was stored up had a purpose.
Yeah.
I'm 6'1".
Exactly, right?
I have double D breasts and huge hips. That shit needed things to grow.
It was exactly perfect. It needed to be there for those
spend
the time on.
I look at my friends who are going through this, and I look at my daughters, and I think your body is perfect.
Yeah.
I don't need to decide for you what your body is or isn't. I'm here to go, I will teach you what I know about having a healthy and connected body. I'm not going to not talk to you about portion size and food management and foods that work well for your well-being and foods that don't, and listening to your body and your appetite and stuffing down emotions versus back into connection. You know, we're going to still have all of those conversations, but they're not coming from a point of body shame, and they're always coming from a point of body autonomy. You don't have to eat everything that's on your plate. You get to follow how your body feels. All of those conversations. Exercise is beautiful. Coordination is an amazing thing to have. Body strength empowers you. Beautiful conversation. We're not stepping around them. And I'm also not looking at my third daughter, who does have, in inverted commas, a weight issue. She does. But she also has a body that physiologically is exceptionally different to anybody else's body. I also trust that there's a greater wisdom in that.
Yeah, that you can't grasp yet. And so, again, you kind of have to sit back and how do I honour that? Like, how do I honour that and honour it?
Yeah, at the same time as empowering her. So I'm still going to give you the skills. We're not stepping around it. But I can tell you, as the mother of I'm going to say it again, but in inverted commas, obese child, is I see the stigma and the judgment and the shade that gets cast. Like, that's totally palpable in our society. But as long as that parent or me sees it, is consciously, has seen whoever they need to see to get the advice they need to get to offer the best pathways for that child to make their own conscious choices and grow into a healthy, individuated and connected adult, then back the fuck off. It doesn't need to mean anything.
Yeah.
And there's something incredibly glorious about hugging fat. There is something so nourishing about squeezing my little Lola that is like, satisfying in so many ways that just isn't with a bony little person.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I could talk about this till the cows come home because there's, you know, particularly with Lola, there's a whole lot of stuff. But I even look at Jade, who hasn't got her period yet, and I have watched how much her body has changed in the last 6 months. It would be easy to judge her, as I would have been back in, you know, grade 6 and year 7, and she's now in year 8. And yet what I see is a body that's doing exactly what it needs to do. She's fit, she's young, she's healthy, she's connected. That body is distributing its fat and its connections in all of the ways that it needs to.
And you know, I love that you're speaking on this because you have the lens of a practitioner, right?
Yeah.
Most people have the lens of internalized shame-fueled culture.
Yes,
right? And toxic body image. And that's the shit that's getting projected out onto each other, children, you know, anybody they come into contact with, right? Not looking at the function of this on a pure physiological level. Because we've instead got, you know, the quest for whatever distorted version of beauty we have right now or health we have right now, right? And that's the difference.
Yeah, it probably is. I do often think it was a genius, my studying naturopathy, because I know the body with such an in-depth knowing, mental knowing, that it serves me no end every day. And that I think knowing the extraordinary physiology that your body is doing just for you, like the most devoted consort that it is, without you even consciously having to think about it, is a huge point of reverence and connection when you're reforming body love.
Yeah, that you don't have to ask, and your heart beats for you, and you breathe, and you know how to excrete toxins, and it just does it for you in service of you. Yeah. Every single millisecond of the day.
Yep. Yeah. And I would also say it's so funny because our culture tells us that our most sexually prime and ability to attractive version of our life is, let's say, 20, potentially even under. And yet what I can tell you is that the opposite is true. The older you get, the more scarred and saggy and the less fucks you give, the more extraordinary love and attraction it can be, which is completely counterculture.
Because you go deeper and deeper into the essence of your own body.
Yeah. And you really realize that there's no performance required at all. That the more you're here, the more there is available to you. And I think that's it's a really beautiful gift. And I think also, having worked with so many women so intimately, I also think that is an enormous gift, because even as the person witnessing, I can see how extraordinarily beautiful they are in all of their colours and shapes and movements and architecture. Extraordinary beauty that is desirable and sexy and gorgeous. And as the witnesser of being able to see that, it has allowed me to reconcile the distortions that I had about my own body. I'm that? Wow. Really? Is that how Nick would see me? Wow. So I also think there's a great beauty in gathering in places and spaces of women, particularly if there's levels of if there's levels of nudity involved, where because it really allows you the capacity to witness and potentially even be witnessed in ways that normalize and expand the narrative that you currently see your body through.
Because when you take away all of the clothing and all of the things that cover up, and you pair it right back to the raw flesh, then I mean that's beautiful, right? Because there's nothing that's trying to be anything other than what it is.
Yeah, but when you really see that as with beauty, it's a total game changer.
Kind of reminds me of like a life drawing, like a life drawing, and how you like that practice asks you to see the body in ways that you don't usually see the body.
Yes, totally. So we would love you to come and join our month of Body Love in Soul-Driven Motherhood. We will be having 4 experts coming in to run workshops in there, and then we will be continuing the conversation for another week and a half or so after those workshops end, and really distilling down key points for each of us involved in that and having a bit of a body love challenge to round that out. And we would love for you to join us. So you can do that by connecting just for $39 for the entire month of Body Love. You can find out more about that at nourishingthemother.com.au or Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes.
And to be Bridge.
It's bridgetwood.life. And you, Jules?
Is Suburban Sandcastles? No!
Not.
My brain just completely, my mouth opened before my brain had reconciled. No, you can connect with me at julietanner.love. God, that's funny.
Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
And if you're ready to ask, in what ways can I show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can I mine the wisdom from the experiences of my life and expand into those challenges? Then you're a soul-driven, heart-led mama who's ready for conversations and a community that supports her journey. Come join Soul-Driven Motherhood. We'd love to have you.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.